I arrived at my own engagement party to find the locks had been changed. The restaurant was dark, the reservation was gone. My future in-laws had canceled everything 48 hours earlier, without a single word to me, and redirected every guest to a private dining room across town that I was explicitly not invited to enter. 73 people who loved me were already on their way. What I did in the next hour ended up in a Forbes article about corporate whistleblowers, and I was still wearing the dress I'd bought specifically for that night. My name is Fiona, and at 29 years old, I was 3 weeks away from marrying the man I had spent 4 years building a life with. I was also apparently 3 weeks away from discovering exactly how much that life had been built on sand. Let me back up. I grew up in Decatur, Georgia, not the manicured country club side of the Atlanta suburbs, but the east side. The kind of neighborhood where your neighbors leave casseroles on your porch when someone dies, where the same families have lived on the same streets for 40 years, where ambition is something you carry quietly because nobody around you has the luxury of being loud about it yet. My mother worked the overnight shift at a hospital laundry facility for 11 years while I was growing up. My father drove a city bus. They were the two most dignified people I have ever known, and they raised me to understand that you do not need someone's permission to belong anywhere. I put myself through the University of Georgia on a combination of grants, loans, and a part-time job transcribing legal depositions that paid $12 an hour. That job, unglamorous as it was, taught me more about how power actually works than any business class I ever took. I watched rich people lie under oath. I watched their lawyers maneuver around the truth with such precision it looked like a sport. I learned how to read between lines before I was old enough to rent a car. By the time I was 26, I had my CPA license and a position at a mid-size forensic accounting firm in Buckhead. I specialized in financial fraud investigations, the kind where someone inside a company has been quietly siphoning money for years and everyone else is somehow the last to notice. I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. My clients called me when they suspected something was wrong but couldn't prove it yet. I was the person who came in, looked at the numbers, and found exactly where the body was buried. I met my fiancé, whom I'll call my ex-fiancé now, at a charity auction 3 years before all of this happened. He was handsome and smart and completely charming in the way that certain men are when they have been raised to perform charm as a survival skill. His family was old Atlanta money. The kind that came from real estate acquisitions made 3 generations back, when acquiring real estate in Atlanta required certain advantages that nobody in his family talked about anymore. His mother sat on 4 nonprofit boards and had her name on a wing of the children's hospital. His father had been a federal judge before he retired. They were, by every external measure, exactly the kind of family that Decatur girls like me were supposed to feel grateful to be invited into. I noticed the warning signs early. I want to be honest about that because I think the most important thing I can tell you is that I saw them and I chose to explain them away. The first time I brought my parents to a dinner at his family's house in Buckhead, his mother, I'll just call her my ex-mother-in-law, because that's the closest I'll get, spent 40 minutes asking my father increasingly specific questions about his retirement plans, in a tone that made it clear she was trying to calculate exactly how much of a financial burden my family might eventually become. When my father calmly told her he had a pension and a paid-off house, she pivoted to asking my mother about her hobbies, as if a woman who had worked nights for a decade must surely have filled her days with something frivolous. I told myself she was just nervous. I told myself she was from a different generation. I told myself that my fiancé was not his mother, which was true, but was also the thing I told myself every single time I needed to not see what I was seeing. The engagement party was planned for a Saturday evening in late October. We had reserved the private dining room at a restaurant in Midtown, a beautiful space, exposed brick, warm lighting, the kind of place where the food is excellent and the noise level lets you actually hear the people you love. I had put down a $1,500 deposit. The guest list was 73 people. My parents, my brother, my cousins, my college roommate who had flown in from Portland, coworkers I'd known for years, neighbors who had watched me grow up. My fiancé's family had, at his mother's quiet insistence, organized a separate intimate dinner for their side of the family for the following night. I had accepted this with a graciousness that, looking back, I am a little embarrassed by. I arrived at the restaurant at 6:45, 15 minutes before guests were supposed to begin arriving. I was wearing a deep green silk dress I had found at a consignment shop in Little Five Points and had taken in at the waist myself because I can do that. I looked, if I say so myself, exceptional. The front of the restaurant was dark. Not closed for a private event, dark, chairs on tables. No host at the stand. A handwritten sign on the door that said they were closed for a private event, but the private event was not mine. I stood on the sidewalk for about 4 seconds. Then I pulled out my phone and called the restaurant manager, a woman I had spoken to 6 times in the process of planning this reservation. She answered on the second ring, and I could tell from the first syllable that she had been dreading this call. "Miss Fiona," she said, and then stopped. I asked her what was happening. She told me the reservation had been canceled 48 hours ago by a woman who had called claiming to be my future mother-in-law, stating that the engagement party was no longer taking place and that the deposit should be refunded to the credit card used to book the room. Except the deposit had been paid on my card, and the refund had been issued to a different card entirely. I asked the manager to repeat that. She did. She sounded genuinely mortified. She told me the woman had called twice, once to cancel, and once to confirm the refund had processed, and that both times she had specifically asked that the restaurant not contact me directly, explaining that there had been a family misunderstanding that my fiancé was handling personally. I thanked the manager. I hung up, my phone buzzed. It was my college roommate, texting to say she was 5 minutes away and asking if she should park in the deck on Crescent, or if there was street parking. I stood on that sidewalk in my green silk dress, watching the evening traffic move past me, and I did something I am genuinely proud of. I did not panic. I did not call my fiancé screaming. I did not sit down on the curb and cry, even though my chest felt like something heavy had just been set down in the center of it and left there. I opened my contacts, found the number of a colleague I trusted, and called him. He was another forensic accountant, someone I had worked with on 3 separate cases, a man I trusted completely, who also happened to owe me a very significant professional favor. I told him I needed 48 hours of his time, starting immediately, and that I would explain everything later. He said yes without hesitation. Then I started making calls. My fiancé picked up on the 3rd ring. I could hear what sounded like a piano being played softly in the background and the low murmur of a dinner party already underway. He did not sound surprised to hear from me. He sounded like someone who has been waiting for a difficult conversation to start and has already rehearsed his opening lines. "Babe," he said, in a tone I can only describe as preemptively soothing. I told him I was standing outside a dark restaurant where our engagement party was supposed to be, and that 73 people were currently on their way there, and that I had just learned his mother had called and canceled the reservation and redirected my deposit refund to her own credit card. I said all of this in a voice so calm that I surprised myself. There was a pause. The piano kept playing in the background. Then he said his mother had made some changes because she felt the original venue wasn't quite right for the kind of event she had envisioned for us, and that she had arranged something. He used the word elevated at the Alderton Club, which was his family's private members club in Brookhaven, and that he had assumed she would have told me by now, and he was sorry if the communication had been less than perfect. But the important thing was that there was a beautiful space ready and everyone could still have a wonderful evening. I asked him how many people the new venue was expecting. He hesitated. Then he said around 30. I asked him which 30. He said his mother had curated the guest list. I asked him what that meant. He lowered his voice, and I heard a door close in the background, as if he had stepped away from the dinner party to have this conversation somewhere private. He told me that his mother felt it would be more appropriate, given the setting, to keep the guest list to immediate family and close colleagues. He said the Alderton Club had a certain atmosphere that required a certain kind of guest, and that my extended family, he said this with a kind of careful gentleness that I will never forget as long as I live, might be more comfortable somewhere less formal. I said, "You're telling me your mother uninvited my family from our engagement party." He said, "I'm telling you she made a judgment call." I said, "My mother works the night shift so she could be here tonight." He said, "Fiona, please." I said, "Did you know about this before today?" There was a long pause. The piano had stopped. "My mother was trying to do something nice," he said. That was the moment I understood everything. Not just about the engagement party, but about all of it. The dinners where his mother spoke over my parents. The charity events where he introduced me to his colleagues' wives, and I could see him calibrate, slightly, the way he described my job depending on who he was talking to. The way he had, over the course of 4 years, never once pushed back on a single thing his mother said about me or my family. Not once, not even when she'd referred to my neighborhood as the other side of town, in a way that left zero ambiguity about what she meant. He didn't want a partner. He wanted a credential with a personality. He wanted someone impressive enough to display, from a background obscure enough not to complicate things. I told him I would see him shortly. I said it pleasantly. I hung up, then I called my brother. My brother is 34 and he is built like someone who spent his 20s on a construction crew, which he did. He is also the calmest person I have ever known. I told him what was happening in about 90 seconds. He didn't say much. He said, "What do you need?" I said, "I need you to tell everyone to hold where they are for 20 minutes. Tell them there's been a small chance. Don't explain yet. And then I need you to lead the caravan." He said, "To where?" I said, "I'm figuring that out right now." I hung up and started working. Here is the thing about being a forensic accountant that most people don't fully appreciate. Your job is essentially to reconstruct the truth from fragments that someone has gone to significant trouble to obscure. You learn to move fast, think in parallel, and never let the urgency of the situation make you sloppy. I had been trained by years of cases, by the deposition transcripts I used to type at $12 an hour, to stay cold when everything around me was hot. I had 3 tasks. First, I needed to find out where my deposit money had actually gone. Second, I needed a venue for 73 people within the next 40 minutes. Third, I needed to understand exactly what my future mother-in-law had done, legally speaking, because I had a feeling that canceling someone else's reservation and redirecting their refund was not something that existed in a legal gray area. I called my colleague back and gave him the account information I needed him to start pulling. Then I called a woman I had done pro bono consulting work for 2 years earlier. She ran a catering and events business out of a beautiful restored firehouse in Old Fourth Ward that she rented out for private events. I had helped her identify an employee who had been skimming from her books for 8 months. She had told me then that she owed me one. I told her I was collecting. She laughed and said, "How many people?" I said 73. She said, "Give me 30 minutes. While she started making calls, I opened my laptop. Yes, I keep a laptop in my car because I am who I am, and I started doing what I do. My future mother-in-law was the treasurer of a family foundation that my fiancé's family had established 12 years ago, ostensibly to fund college scholarships for first-generation students in the Atlanta metro area. It was a legitimate seeming organization with a decent public profile. They held annual galas. They had a respectable website. His mother's name was in the Atlanta Business Chronicle every spring when they announced the scholarship recipients. I had looked at the foundation's 990 filings once, casually, about a year into dating my fiancé, not because I suspected anything, just because looking at 990s is what I do the way other people read the news. I had noticed something slightly off about the administrative expense ratios, had filed it away as probably nothing, and moved on. I pulled up those filings again now. I had 38 minutes before my brother was going to need a destination. What I found in those 38 minutes was not probably nothing. The foundation had been systematically overpaying a consulting firm for services rendered over the past 6 years. The consulting firm had a generic name and a minimal web presence. The payments ranged from $18,000 to $47,000 per quarter. Over 6 years, the total came to just over $1.2 million. The consulting firm's registered agent, which is a matter of public record, was my future mother-in-law's maiden name. She had been paying herself, or someone, through a shell company out of a nonprofit scholarship fund for 6 years. I sat in my car in the dark parking lot outside the closed restaurant in my green silk dress, and I felt something settle in my chest. Not anger, exactly. More like clarity. The specific cold clarity of someone who has just found exactly where the body was buried. I texted my colleague the registration number of the consulting firm and the 990 data and said, "Verify and document, I need it clean." He texted back 3 minutes later, "Already on it, this is ugly." Then I made one more call. I had a contact at the Georgia Secretary of State's office, a former client whose company I had cleared of wrongdoing in a franchise dispute 2 years back. He wasn't going to work on a Saturday evening, but he was going to pick up when I called, and he was going to point me toward the right person to reach after hours if necessary. He picked up. He pointed me toward the person. Then I called my brother and gave him the address of the firehouse in Old Fourth Ward. 40 minutes later, 73 people in their good clothes were filtering into a warm, exposed brick space with long communal tables and string lights strung from the rafters, and my friend who owned it had somehow conjured a full spread of food and a bartender in the time it took me to drive across town. My mother walked in and looked around and said, "This is beautiful," in a voice that made my throat tighten. I hugged her. I told her I would explain everything later. I told her to go get a drink and find a seat. Then I texted my fiancé, "I'm not coming to the Alderton Club. I'm at the firehouse on Edgewood. Bring your parents if they'd like to come." I set my phone face down on the bar and waited. He called 4 times. I let it go to voicemail. His mother called twice. I let it go to voicemail. At 7:43, the heavy industrial door of the firehouse swung open and my fiancé walked in. He had his coat on like he'd come from somewhere cold. He stood in the doorway for a moment, taking in the room, my 73 guests eating and laughing and filling the space with exactly the kind of noise his mother had decided they weren't refined enough to make, and his face went through several things at once. He spotted me at the far end of the room and walked toward me with the particular stride of someone who is trying to look calm and isn't quite pulling it off. "You need to come to the Alderton Club," he said when he reached me. "My parents are waiting. My father's law partners are there. This looks like," he gestured at the room, and I watched him stop himself from finishing the sentence. I asked him what it looked like. He said he didn't mean it that way. I said, "Your mother stole my deposit and redirected it to her own account." He said his mother had explained that she'd simply moved the financial arrangements to streamline things and that she'd planned to reimburse me. I said that's not what happened. She called the restaurant twice. She had the refund sent to her card. That's not a miscommunication, that's fraud. He told me I was catastrophizing. I said, "I'm a forensic accountant. Catastrophizing is not actually something I do professionally." He lowered his voice. There were people nearby and he was very aware of it. He said, "Fiona, I need you to think about what you're doing right now. My father's colleagues are sitting at a table in Brookhaven waiting to meet you. This is important for my career. We can sort out whatever happened with the deposit, I promise. But if you make a scene right now..." "If I make a scene," I said. "I didn't mean it like that. Your mother canceled my engagement party, uninvited my family, redirected my money, and expected me to show up at a club that has had exactly one black member in its 112-year history and smile for your father's colleagues." I kept my voice perfectly level. "And you're asking me not to make a scene." He opened his mouth and closed it. I said, "Did you know? Before today." He didn't answer, that was my answer. I said, "I need you to understand something. I have spent 4 years making myself smaller so your family would be comfortable. I have smiled through things I should have pushed back on. I have given your mother the benefit of the doubt approximately 150 times when she did not deserve it, and tonight she did this." I paused. "I'm done being small." His parents arrived 12 minutes later. I don't know what they expected when they walked in. Maybe they thought the sight of 73 people having a good time in a converted firehouse in Old Fourth Ward would embarrass me. Maybe they thought I would be chastened and apologetic. His mother was wearing a cream blazer and pearls, and she walked in with the posture of someone accustomed to entering rooms and having the room adjust to her. The room did not adjust. My brother saw them come in and simply crossed his arms and watched, which is the most intimidating thing my brother does, and he knows it. His mother came straight toward me. She kissed the air beside my cheek like nothing was wrong, which was almost impressive, and then she leaned in and said, quietly with a tight smile, "Fiona, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's find somewhere to talk privately," I said. "I'm comfortable right here." She maintained the smile. "Your guests are having a lovely time, but your fiancé's father has people waiting for you in Brookhaven who came specifically to meet you. It would be very poor form not to go." I said, "You canceled my reservation. You redirected my deposit refund to your personal credit card. I'd like to know why." The smile didn't move. The venue wasn't appropriate for the occasion. "For whom?" She glanced briefly and pointedly toward a table where my cousins were laughing at something my aunt had said. "Fiona," she said, and the way she said my name was so freighted with pity that I could feel it like a hand pressing down on my shoulder. "I have been in this city for 40 years. I know how these things work. You're a clever girl and you've done very well for yourself, but there are certain settings, certain expectations, and your people, wonderful as I'm sure they are not accustomed to." "My mother," I said, and I let my voice carry just a little, "worked the overnight shift last night so she could come here tonight. My father drove 4 hours from where my parents retired to in Savannah. My college roommate flew in from Portland. These are not my people. They are my family. And you uninvited them from my engagement party because you were embarrassed by where I come from." His father had drifted over. He was a tall man with the kind of deliberate stillness that comes from decades on the bench, and he put a hand on his wife's arm and looked at me with something I couldn't quite read. "Young lady," he said in his measured way, "I understand you're upset, but there are ways to handle disagreements in a family that don't involve." "Sir," I said respectfully, because I was raised right, "I'm not having a family disagreement. I'm reporting a financial crime." The firehouse went very slightly quieter in our immediate vicinity. His father said, "I beg your pardon." I reached into my bag. Yes, I had the documents. Because when I drove across town, I had stopped at a Kinko's for 7 minutes on the way. I told you, I think, in parallel. And I laid 3 pages on the table in front of him. Not in front of his wife, in front of him. The former federal judge. Because I am also strategic. "Your wife is the registered treasurer of the Alderton Family Foundation," I said. "Over the past 6 years, the foundation has made quarterly payments to a consulting firm totaling approximately $1.2 million. The registered agent of that consulting firm is your wife's maiden name. The firm has no employees, no website, no documented deliverables, and no verifiable business activity. This is what's known as a pass-through scheme. I have 12 years of 990s, the corporate registration documents, and wire transfer records. My colleague is currently pulling bank statements." His father looked at the pages. His father was a former federal judge who had spent his career reading documents. He looked at the pages for a long time. His wife said, "This is absurd. She's making things up. She's a disgruntled Patricia." His father's voice was very quiet. It stopped her cold. He looked at me. "Public record," I said. "The 990s are filed with the IRS and available through ProPublica's nonprofit Explorer. The corporate registration is through the Georgia Secretary of State. The wire transfers," I paused, "my colleague will have those documented within the hour." My fiancé was standing slightly behind his mother, and he had gone the color of old concrete. I don't think he knew. I want to be fair to him. I genuinely do not think he knew about the foundation. But I also think that when you spend 4 years not looking at things you don't want to see, you don't get a lot of credit for being surprised when someone else looks at them. His mother grabbed his arm. "This is a vendetta," she said, loudly enough now that people around us were definitely listening. "She is doing this to humiliate us. She has never been right for you. I have said it from the beginning. She comes from nothing, and she has spent 4 years trying to." "The Alderton Family Foundation," I said over her calmly, "has awarded a total of $412,000 in scholarships over 6 years. It has paid $1.2 million to a shell company controlled by the foundation's treasurer. That means for every dollar that went to a first-generation college student, $3 went somewhere else. I want to know where it went." The room was quiet now. Really quiet. My fiancé said, "Mom, just that." His mother's expression curdled through several things: fury, fear, something that might have been shame, and then she turned to his father and said, "Elliot, handle this." His father looked at her. He looked at the documents. He looked at me. He said, "How long have you known?" I said, 40 minutes. There was a pause that felt like it lasted significantly longer than it did. He said, "I'll need to make some calls." I said, "I know." His mother made one more attempt. She straightened her blazer, she reset her expression into something closer to composed, and she looked at me with a particular kind of contempt that I think was her most honest face, the one underneath all the galas and the scholarships announcements and the charity boards. "You think this makes you something," she said. "You think because you found some paperwork that you've, what, proven yourself? You will never be what this family needed. You were always a project. A charity case who got too comfortable." My brother from across the room said nothing. He just watched. My mother, who had been listening for the past 4 minutes from a table approximately 8 feet away, set down her glass with a sound like a period at the end of a sentence. She did not stand up. She did not say anything. She just looked at this woman with the specific expression of someone who has worked the overnight shift and raised 2 children and paid off a house and has absolutely nothing left to prove to anybody. And that look said everything that needed to be said. My fiancé's mother looked away first. I slid the ring off my finger. It was a nice ring. I want to be clear that I'm not sentimental about objects, but it was a very nice ring, and I placed it on the table in front of my fiancé, without drama, without ceremony, without any of the speeches people make in movies when they're ending things. "I'm not going to Brookhaven," I said. "I'm going to stay here with my family and have a good night. You should probably call a lawyer." Your own lawyer, not your father's. He looked at the ring. He looked at me. He said, Fiona. I said good night. He left. His mother left with him, which I think was the first completely honest thing she had done in a long time, finally making it clear through her exit exactly whose side she was on and whose she wasn't. His father stayed for another 10 minutes. He shook my hand before he left, which I did not expect, and he said, I'm sorry this happened, in a way that suggested he meant it about more than just tonight. I don't know what he did after that. I know what eventually happened, because it is a matter of public record. The foundation underwent an audit 18 months later, the consulting firm was dissolved, and a settlement was reached with the Georgia Attorney General's office. No criminal charges were ultimately filed, which I have feelings about, but the foundation was restructured and its scholarship program was placed under independent oversight. $412,000 became $1.8 million in the first year under new management, because it turns out when you stop taking 3/4 of the money off the top, you can fund a lot of scholarships. My fiancé and I did not get back together. I want to be absolutely clear about that because I know some of you are wondering. We talked once on the phone about 3 weeks later. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't known about the foundation. He said he had spent his whole life not questioning things he should have questioned, and he was starting to understand what that had cost him. I believed him, actually. I believed he was genuinely sorry. But sorry doesn't reconstruct 4 years of watching someone shrink themselves to fit into your family's idea of acceptable and choosing to let them shrink. Sorry doesn't get you back the version of yourself you were before you started making yourself small for someone else's comfort. I wished him well. I meant it. I hung up. The firehouse party went until almost midnight. My cousin's husband, who plays guitar, ended up doing an impromptu set in the corner while people danced. My roommate caught a 6 a.m. flight and told me before she left that it was the best engagement party she had ever been to, even though it wasn't technically an engagement party anymore. My mother danced with my father for the first time I had seen in years, under the string lights, while my brother stood nearby with his arms uncrossed for once, watching them with an expression I recognized as the one our family makes when something unexpectedly good is happening. I stood at the bar with a glass of wine and I watched my people, not my people in the way she had meant it, but my actual people, the ones who had shown up for me 100 different times before this, fill that beautiful room with exactly the kind of noise and warmth and life that all her country club members' clubs couldn't manufacture, no matter how many galas they threw, or how much they paid their shell companies. It has been 14 months since that night. I'm still in forensic accounting. I took on a new partner at my firm, the colleague who helped me that night, and we've grown the practice by about 40%. I sleep better than I have in 4 years, which I didn't expect, but which makes complete sense when I think about it. The particular exhaustion of constantly managing someone else's perception of you is something you don't fully appreciate until it stops. I still have the green dress. I wore it to a client dinner last month and it still fits perfectly. My father asked me once, a few months after everything, if I regretted how it had all played out. He asked it carefully, the way he asks careful questions as if he's not sure whether the answer will be what he's hoping for. I told him the only thing I regretted was the years I'd spent convincing myself that needing someone's approval to feel like I belonged somewhere was something I could live with. He nodded. Then he said, Your mother and I always knew you belonged everywhere. I think about that sentence a lot. I think about how long I went without believing it, and how much energy I put into trying to earn the permission of people who had no authority to grant it. I think about the moment I stood outside that dark restaurant in my green dress, in the middle of everything falling apart, and instead of waiting for someone to fix it, I opened my laptop and fixed it myself. You do not need permission to belong anywhere. The only table that matters is the one you build yourself, surrounded by the people who never made you earn your seat at it.